учасників, які всі підтвердили участь, вони трошки затримуються, але ми будемо починати все одно круглий стіл, бо ми, так би мовити, в жорсткому регламенті. Я думаю, що всім учасникам відомо, про що ми сьогодні говоритимемо. Я хочу наголосити, що сьогодні в нас є заступник міністра соцполітики та перший заступник голови пенсійного фонду. І це дуже добре, бо нарешті ми можемо публічно почути позицію тих людей від тих міністерств, які безпосередньо займаються, скажімо так, витрачанням частини зібраних податків. Це дуже важливо і вони мають бути залучені до реформування. Я хочу сказати, що сьогоднішню зустріч і круглий стіл модеруватиме Наталія Кононенко. Вона є фактично головою аналітичної служби Українського кризового медіа-центру, і вона дуже знається добре на податковій реформі. Тож я передаю слово Наталі, але у мене велике прохання до всіх спікерів. В нас є синхронний переклад англійською для наших іноземних і журналістів, і тих людей, які
To English, so for those who follow us online and for foreign journalists, so that your words are reflected clearly and adequately, please do not make haste while speaking. Okay, we start our work. I think that all our guests are well-known people. We will make closer acquaintance while we discuss the issues planned for discussion. So, as far as I understand, everybody who is interested in the issue of taxes are awaiting the mid-February, where the introduction of certain corrections to the existing tax legislation is planned, and as far as we understand, there may be some corrections of the budget for 2015, and we will talk about this issue today as well. Our first issue relates to the reform of the single social contribution. I think that everybody present knows why this is complicated and that we are on the eve of amendments, of tabling amendments to these tax tariffs and rates. We have a head of the working group that tabled the draft or will table the draft aimed at the amendments with the single social unit. We also have representatives of the social department of our government who are the managers of this budget finance, and we have also representatives of business circles here. These are the people who fill the budget. I regret very much that we do not see here Oksana Prodan, because this was her quote. She said that, in fact, the moderator of the reform of the single social contribution should be the social segment of the government, and I think that everybody will agree with me, and I give the floor first to representatives of the Ministry of Social Policies. So the question is like this. There are certain innovations about the changes to the tax legislation, and the country is living within the framework of the new taxation reality. You represent the structure which manages this money that all the country is collecting. How satisfied you are with what has happened to the taxation field of Ukraine, and how this enabled you to raise the revenue for the budget, and how this will find the reflection in the spending of money. I will be strict in moderating because we have a lot of issues to discuss, and I hope that you will be able to make your messages within 3 or 4 minutes, and then we will pass the floor to other discussion participants. Good afternoon, dear participants. I want to inform you that, first of all, we are talking about the payment of the single social contribution, which is being paid by every employer and every hired person who work according to work contract from their salaries, and the employer collects the single social contribution from them and pays them into the obligatory social insurance funds. This money is being distributed between 4 funds: the pension fund that provides for the payment of pensions, the fund of general obligatory unemployment insurance, which provides money for unemployed and also spends money to employ the people who address this fund. Also the social insurance fund on the temporary loss of working ability. This is the payments for sick leaves and rehabilitation after serious diseases of people who are insured and their families, and also insurance against accidents during production and professional diseases. This is about traumas during their work. So the money from this fund is used, first of all, in order to help this person not to become a disabled person. But if they do lose their working ability, then to provide them with the insurance for the salary that they lose because they cannot work anymore. So these 4 directions are being provided for from the contributions to the general obligatory social insurance. First of all, the reform that's been introduced in Ukraine since the 1st of January relating to lowering the single social contribution. It is too early probably to draw any conclusions and say whether this influenced the increase of insurance payments, because the formula in the legislation provides an opportunity for those employers who want to bring the salary out of shadow, gives them the opportunity to do so, and in this way to decrease the amount of the single social contribution and the burden on the salary fund. There is a lot of different visions, including at the level of legislators of this situation, and they think that corrections should be made, introduced to the formula suggested in the law, and I think that very soon we will see those amendments. There's statistics that we should lean upon, and we have a hope that this reform will help to bring out of shadow the salary fund, and we hope that this will influence, if not this year, then in forthcoming years, will lead to the increase in the money going for the fund of social insurance. Also, there's a proposal to merge 2 funds, the fund to insure against temporary loss of capability and the fund of insurance against accidents. We hope that this merger will happen in the nearest future, during the first half year of 2015. So respectively, the spending of money in a non-targeted way will decrease on directions that did not have a insurance direction, and the respective law was adopted today by the parliament. But we heard two important messages about the reform. You think that the changes that there are sufficient to bring the salaries out of shadow. This is a very interesting message. I have the following question. Please be more precise and specific. I am sure that there is such a figure and it is quoted in the mass media. What is the social deficit of the budget for 2015? And if there is an understanding how, with the help of the taxation changes that were adopted, this problem could be solved. And then we'll go to the business. And it is the business people that should solve this issue. And as for the resource that we forecast we will have as a result of this reform of the single social contribution, this is more of a question to the pension fund, because the pension fund today is the only fund of social insurance that has a deficit. As for the merger of the social insurance funds, we forecast that the reform, including the reform of the single social payment, will allow to additionally save 1,200,000 hryvnia. Today we have a resolution of the government adopted at the last sitting of the Cabinet of Ministers about the new redistribution of the single social payment between the funds for social insurance. All of them, apart from the pension fund, have to be deficit-free, and the deficit of the pension fund is covered by the state budget. And the first head of the board of the pension fund, Mykhaylo Sokolov, will tell us in more detail.
The deficit of the pension fund budget is forecasted at the level of 18 billion. All the money that the pension fund will not get will be covered by the state budget. As to the issue of whether we expect this year any additional flows, I believe that the legislative initiative which has been implemented provides for the opportunity to take salaries out of the shadow, but taking into account the novelty, the fact that the situation in the economy is so difficult, I believe that we will have the situation when, at the expense of these additional funds and reducing of the single contribution, we expect to get what is provided for in the budget, 7 billion more than it was last year. Thank you. I believe I really would like to thank the representatives of the social sector of the government, because you have never been coming to our roundtables in the past. I understand that this is a brave step on your behalf, and I don't think that this discussion will be very comfortable for everyone, but it's good that we will have it. And I would like to give the floor to the representatives of people who understand very much, very well, how business processes are taking place in conditions of new tax reality. and they will tell whether they can confirm your expectations as to the amounts of additional funds coming to the budget after the tax system of Ukraine will be reformed. Which one of you will start? The representatives of business. Mykhaylo, will you? Good afternoon. If you allow me, I would like to say a couple of words about what the reform is related to. Why do we need it? We are the leaders probably in the world talking about the taxation of this wages fund. We cannot separately calculate the physical persons tax and the single social contribution. That is basically the debt, the tax which the same person is to pay, because when we live, we spend money that we get. All the people working in the businesses, they're interested in not how much taxes were paid, but how much they will get, how much cash they will get. The specialist who's highly competitive in the labor market is thinking whether he should stay in Ukraine or go abroad. Such a citizen compares what will the citizen be getting working in Ukraine or outside of Ukraine, not how much taxes he will or she will be paying. So we need to take into account both of these indicators, and we need to just add them up. Ukraine is the country with a very low GDP per capita, but at the same time, it is the country which charges very high taxes from the physical person, just like the countries with high incomes, and we become non-competitive because it's not profitable to produce certain goods in our country, even if we do not think that we have some other expenditures, if we do not compare us with China, where the labor is very cheap, and that is the factor which kills Ukrainian economy. De facto, people are either going into the shadow and they are not paying that such internal migration, or they immigrate abroad. This is no secret that people who got good education, they immigrate from Ukraine. That's the result of the policy we have. Second, if we created the conditions when people, the workers, immigrated into the shadow or abroad, that means that we created the conditions so that where we created the system which would collapse, because our pension commitments, they are just growing because of the demographic situation. We need to compensate it, and we would need basically to create more jobs, to collect more money, but we see the opposite process, and so introducing amendments into this system are inevitable. We either will do it in the regime that could be managed, or this will happen when it will not be possible to manage the process because there will be no money to pay pensions. I'm sorry, Mykhaylo. Are we now closer to which scenario? When we can manage the reforms or when we cannot manage the reforms? Yes, that's what I wanted to talk about. This reform has been discussed for a long time, and it has been developed as part of the reanimation reform package. What I see, well, I hope will be adopted with all these amendments which were developed by Andriy, Zhurzhiy, but that is just half of the solution. Because, well, on the one hand, there's a progress which shows that you are going down, but there is a big progress And we hope that from the next year, the single social contribution will be reduced for everyone, because those companies who were paying wide salaries, they cannot increase their salaries fund. They will get nothing this year. They will hopefully get something next year. That's a big achievement. But with that, the situation is like that. If now the company increases the salary, and their payments of single social contribution is at the same level in the situation when the business survives through difficulties with paying salaries, with being profitable. It's clear that not everyone could afford that, and as any compromise or semi or half political measure would not have an effect that we hoped it will have when we were developing it in RPR. Talking about the agrarian sector, which I represent, this will probably not happen, because in many cases, talking about single social contribution, we were paying it, but that's not the situation when we have additional money. We need to increase salaries, but that's also money. And the company has to give away, and plus the taxation will grow. That's serious limitation. 1 minute more, 30 seconds, and that limitation has a main threat that we will have to face. If this year the state does not see any growth of income from SSC, then no one can guarantee that the norm 0.6 and the coefficient, the ratio, will continue to be in place. And making such an important step forward this year, we will next year make 2 steps back. Thank you. I agree with your last thesis that we will not be able to receive this year what we can receive. We will not be able to receive it even next year, but your assessment that all these measures are non-sufficient, but there is but they will have a certain effect. So representatives of business, but be briefer, please. Pavel Sebastianovich, Nova Kraina. I would like to support Mykhaylo in what he said, that these measures are not sufficient, but I would say it even differently. The shadow economy and salaries and envelopes, that is the problem of Ukraine, which needs to be immediately addressed. And that cosmetic reduction of SSC will not address the problem, and even the proposals to make 18% of SSC will not resolve the problem. The business that was not paying wide salaries with 50-60% of burden, they will not be paying with 30 or 40% burden. And the solution should be even more drastic. We suggest to follow Georgian way. When the pension fund is cancelled, then the pensions are transformed into social assistance, which is paid when the claim writes an application. Our pensioners, oligarchs, receive pensions, the pensioners, millionaires, the pensions with big money get pensions. They don't need them, and those who need any social assistance, they don't get this assistance, so they get too little. So I believe that SSC should be reduced so much that the burden or load on the salaries fund should be not more than 20%. On the one hand, we have pensioners who we have to maintain, to support, and this business that is to develop. Without the development of business, we will not be able to support anyone. So the burden on salary fund should be reduced, and we believe that the personal tax should be 10%, and SSC should be fixed at the level of single taxpayers, which is should be 500 hryvnias per worker, and the whole pension fund should be reformed. I would like to emphasize your thought, your idea. Basically, you were saying that reduction of tax rates should follow together with a further decrease of social load on a budget. These are, I believe, two simultaneous processes.
Еще представители бизнеса.
There are other representatives of business in the office. Yulia is a representative of business circles. I may be mistaken. I thought that you will introduce the norms that the drafts that the parliament will consider. If you don't, then Andriy will do this. I want to tell you that, first of all, I wanted to dwell on the last message that the processes should take place by cutting the budget expenditure, because this is probably the only way. I agree that it should be lowered drastically, but I do represent business. But this idea emerged with the experts of the reanimation package of reforms, and it was transformed into the draft law that Andriy Zhurzhiy has worked on. I think that he will himself tell us about this, but the only message that was introduced from the very start by the experts of the reanimation package of reforms, that there should not be losses of the budget in 2015, and the size of all the payments of single social contribution should be preserved at the level of 2014, and the effect should be paid out to people who work. And it shows that the state loses nothing, and people will be able to get their legal salary in a bigger amount than in 2014. This is a very simple law idea, but it is very much transformed in the law number 77 that was adopted on the 27th of December. So the idea was to bring it all together and to agree all the norms. Again, there was quite a lot of clauses that were talking about 3 minimum salaries, or for instance, if we use quotient 0.4, this is about 4.5 thousand hryvnia to fulfill the condition on 800 hryvnias as the condition for the single social payment, and this is impossible to do in 2015, and only a very small amount of enterprises could do this. So we all support Andriy Zhurzhiy in his idea. There are other conditions as well. We should review the 20% that are being suggested now, the necessity to raise the salary by 20%. Maybe we will have to review this clause as well, because for some enterprises, taking into account the current economic situation, it is not the time to raise salaries at all. And only those do raise salaries who by themselves did this in 2014 and tried to compensate losses for their employees, and only the white business can do this. And Mr. Neskhodovsky will say that he has examples when some enterprises were interested in legalizing their salaries, but in general, only white business was interested in these mechanisms. As far as I understand, we are all interested in this mechanism starting to work, but as an expert of rehabilitation, reanimation package of reforms, we insist on the same mechanisms for income tax and we think that this will raise the efficiency of this mechanism, then we will have to drastically lower this burden. There are different approaches. There is a approach of the New Country Foundation. We are not in total agreement about this, that the single social payment should amount to 400 hryvnia, but we do agree that the general aggregate burden for the salary should not be more than 20%. We will have to look for such an opportunity to lower the burden next year, not only by raising the rates of the tax or broadening the basis of the taxation. First of all, we talk about the lowering of budget expenditure and about the inventorization of the pensions, of the lowering of the expenditure of the pension fund. We should look for completely different sources, different from the taxation sphere. Thank you very much. We determined the framework, the limits of the corridor within which Andriy had to work on his draft law. This is the preservation of social payments in 2015 at the level of 2014, and also the raising of the amount of money that people get in 2015. So, Andriy, what have you managed to do, and how you will reply to the business? I'm not sure I will have enough time within 4 or 5 minutes, but I'll try. You know, one of the first steps that we have to undertake in the taxation reform is the solving the question of the raising the salary. We can talk a lot about lowering the taxes, but until we solve the issue with the tax burden on the salary, which now amounts to 60%, you won't be able to legalize the economy, because a great part of business cannot pay legal salaries in such conditions. You know, this is a norm in Ukraine now. Unfortunately, if someone gets a salary in an envelope when a hired worker works as a entrepreneur, we just optimize taxes in this way. I do support my colleagues in that we have to solve this issue simultaneously with reform in taxes and with the revenue and expenditure of the pension fund. It is very sad that we don't see people from the state fiscal service here who do collect this single social payment, because they would say that the business is very much agitated now, and they call and ask how they should use the quotient that is there. So the business does want to pay official taxes, but the state has to create conditions for this. And when colleagues say that they like Georgian experience, I say yes, I do like it as well, but Georgia has realities of its own. They are much smaller, and they had donors that financed the gap, the financial gap that was created then. I think that our ministers would be able to solve the issue if they had the answer to two questions: how much shadow money there is still in the economy, and when it would be legalized. If we had answers to these questions, then we would succeed long ago. There are calculations, but we do not have real figures. And the Georgians, apart from liquidating the pension fund, they also liquidated the single social payment, and they introduced the income tax to the rate of 20%. Over a year, they collected a revenue 3 times bigger than previously. Everyone here will agree that the number of jobs in Georgia has not risen threefold, so we have to consider such options as well, so that we have just an income tax for individuals that then they will be redistributed to social needs and all this. And the business pays only one tax, which is very easily administered. But we have to be frank and say that we have to have a plan. What is the way that we are going to take, where we have to take the resources that will cover the gap. When we concluded the coalition agreement, there was a clause about technical prerequisite to lower the single social payment. We initiated the law before the new year, and we talked to the government, and the law said that the revenue should not fall, but the business has an opportunity to legalize the money, and the revenue should not fall. Yes, not everybody can use this. Yes, there's a lot of additional criteria while we were looking for a compromise. The minimum payment, 700 hryvnia, 3 minimum payments. This is the limit of compromise for us to have what we have to talk about, because different experts were going around with such ideas for many years, but they faced the calculations that said, no, this doesn't work. Now we have the opportunity to discuss what we have to change in order for this mechanism to start to work. I have a great feedback from the business who say, even with this strict criteria, we will use it. But I have another feedback from those who say, until you make the general burden 5%, we won't pay anything. And then the model, even about 20%, which we regard as ideal, does not work for them. So this is a comprehensive and complex reform, but we think that 2015 is a transition year that has to create an additional basis, which is now in the shadow, so that in 2016 we arrive at a correct and efficient solution. We don't have any opportunity to go back, and we think that the single social contribution should only be lowered, and it stipulated quotient 0.4 in 2004, but we have that 0.6 with the transitionary year 2015. They were sure that they will be able to achieve this. So this was the compromise solution in order for us to be responsible for what we do. So ideally, you know, I've been working for 10 years before in business, and I'm not a deputy for long, and I didn't forget this. We understand the ideal picture, but the question is how we arrive at this ideal picture. I can also briefly introduce you to the changes that we suggest. The draft law that today is registered at the Parliament 1863, I hope very much that it will be tabled before the Parliament next week, does stipulate the softening of criteria and formulas that, in the terms that interpret very strictly the essence and significance of those terms, because in practice we have a lot of questions where we take, from which accountancy we take all the figures, statistics or whatever. We have to take taxes from the fiscal services. So we rejected the criterion of 3 minimum salaries. We rejected the criteria of 700 hryvnia. We lowered the threshold to 20%. There's an additional criterion now that has to prevent some embezzlement, that the number of employees cannot rise more than twofold. Like, for instance, if you had a enterprise with one director, you cannot have 1,000 workers at the expense of which you will fulfill the first two criteria. But if you have some flow of personnel, then this will allow you to be within the framework. And this was the question from agrarians who said that they have some seasonal workers, or logistics and retail who say that they have a great flow of personnel like loaders and drivers. And what concerns the 20% and the rise in salaries and the rejection of it. Yes, we tried, and there was a great discussion with the Minister of Finance and the pension fund, but every year there's a rise in revenues from the payment of single social contribution, the natural increase. And they said that this year in the budget it accounts for 7 billion hryvnia. This is something like 8 to 10% of additional revenue. We wanted this to be 10%, and the compromise with the fiscal service means 20%, so that there are no losses forecast in the budget, but the maximum number of entrepreneurs and those who want to legalize so that they can do that. And about the use of quotients about the tax for income tax, we introduced those changes in December when we regarded amendments to the tax code. There was a stipulation for the burden that does not exceed 30%. Regrettably, we didn't manage to reach this, and now when we use the quotient 0.4 to the maximum, the aggregate burden on the salary will amount to 34.9%, which is not a bad figure for the transitionary period, and we'll have to aim at aggregate burden 20-25%. Very often, while communicating on the internet, there's a message that you should lower to 20%, everything will legalize, and the IMF will give you the money to cover the gap. But I will draw your attention to the fact that we talked to the IMF, but they insist that they won't finance any decisions that lead to the losses in the state budget.
Thank you, Andriy. I know that the person who actively participated in that was Ilya Neskhodovsky, and we have another representative of the parliament, Nina Yuzhanina. It would be good, colleagues, if you add a couple of words. On how do you assess new amendments to the legislation, and whether they will be able to improve the situation. Good afternoon. I'm a person who all my life has been working in business, and I know perfectly well what is this load on the burden on the salary fund. And the idea of Andriy I have always supported. And I'm trying now at all the levels, in faction, where there are 150 MPs, I'm trying to explain that this is the first step which is needed. We need to explain that to business. We shouldn't be exaggerating or diminishing the circumstances. Andriy said that we will see additional basis. I believe that now the biggest problem is that all the companies that would like to increase their salaries fund, they are afraid that this fund will be seen, and then if this reform is cancelled, people cannot go back. Then there will be the criminal responsibility, and you have no way back. So now we are trying to do everything not to change the trend. It mostly depends on the cabinet of ministers, where unfortunately people do not always understand what reform we started. You probably also saw and heard Mr. Yatsenyuk, and probably some consultants give him some different information from business. and he stated several times that we'll be analyzing this reform very carefully. I believe that together with Andriy, we will convince in the positive results of the beginning of reform, the first salary for January, which maybe someone is using these 4 criteria. And I know such companies which will be using all the criteria even in January. 95% of all the business, these are small businesses. These are mostly the companies which had so big burden, and most of the salaries there were paid in envelopes. And the situation now is all people from business know what are the mechanisms, what were the mechanisms used to get the salary which was paid via envelopes. So now I do not, I'm not happy that all these schemes are being closed, but the business is has to look for some opportunity to pay salary officially. And the SSC is to help business. I'm sorry that the companies which were paying high white salaries, they do not have any privileges now. I talk to business, to small business, medium size and big business. I explain to them, you have to wait for a year, otherwise we will never move forward. Thank God that we managed to convince the government to make this decision, give the chance to prove that it's worth starting such global reforms in our country. I believe if the result is positive, we will not see it in January, but maybe during the first 3 months we need to talk to the government. We need to say that we are approaching the moment when, at the initiative of the government, there should be more global reform suggested. When that reforms comes from them, this will be more correct. They have all the figures and they can see all the gaps in online regime. We do not have this opportunity. So when we are saying with Andriy, how can we analyze it all to give the information to all the levels? Unfortunately, our capacities are limited. We can influence via you, we can feel your moods, and we can somehow participate in that. So the next step, I believe, will be the step from the government, more global reform, and taking into account what you said about the salary fund. Now there are 2 main directions, agrarian, business, and IT services. And in IT services, the salary fund is 80% of the cost. And what you are saying, that our personnel potential is leaving, HR potential is leaving. That is, first of all, related to IT services. We need to keep good people in Ukraine, and that's the first step.
Just briefly about the government and the support for these initiatives. We have 100% support from the State Fiscal Service and have some complications with the Ministry of Finance, but we do have the support from the Minister Natalia Yareska. I think tomorrow we'll have a meeting with the Prime Minister and everything will be okay. It is so pleasant to sit at one table with optimists. I don't know what the next step of the government will be, but I have a great number of friends who have raised the salaries from the 1st of January 2015, and they could not use this taxation rate about which we talk today. That's why I think that there's a huge problem. Even if you adopt a better legislation that will allow the business to work 2015 in a more adequate conditions, then the business will be concerned with the different regulatory acts, because at the moment you don't have an opportunity to use even what's been adopted. At the moment, I think the business does not expect anything from the government because these are the conditions of survival. I don't understand why participants in our round table are silent about this. You know, I was party of this process, and I want to tell you very briefly, the compromise. This is the compromise. The government's logic has always been like this. Let's raise the rate, and then the revenue will rise. They had not thought that as soon as you raise the burden and the rate, then business starts to look for a possibility to reject this burden. And that's why they are going into shadow. They use taxation grounds and they use schemes, and it's okay because this does kill economy. If you start to collect more than I earn, then I don't work at all, or I work in the shadow. So this is a certain compromise between what the government wanted and what the business wants. The business has not got what they want, and the government have not got what they want. But I hope that this is going to be the first step towards mutual trust. And what hasn't been said is that the single social payment goes to the pension fund and social insurance fund. But is there a feedback from there? Look at how our pensioners live. Look at how much money is spent for the upkeep of the unemployment service, 45%, and their salaries are beyond any reasonable boundaries. The fund of insurance against accidents, working accidents, we know that 80-85% goes to metallurgy and coal mining, but there we pay for the bad attitude of oligarchs because they don't care about production safety. This fund should be liquidated altogether. This is the payment for the, let's take the fund for the temporary loss of working ability. Excuse me, for the first 5 days, an employer pays. Then about maternity and paternity leaves. So many innovations from the Cabinet of Ministers that actually killed any desire to show the real amount of salaries. I hope that this compromise will lead to further actions about the social insurance funds so that employers ensure their responsibility. Excuse me, Ilya. I interrupt you just because of one small problem. If this is possible, I want you to take an active part in the second part of our discussion. But I wanted to show this facet. I will answer briefly why. You know, they still haven't filed their accountancy reports. Second, the message about the norm, about the list that we will have to demand to cancel that the bank does not give salary, until the payment is less than 1/3 of the social payment. There was a letter to all the banks. We're following this. I understand that there are regulatory acts that they didn't manage to amend, but believe me that they will use this opportunity, and many will do. I know the enterprises where calculations are already made. It is very hard to dream about the improvement of the reform when even the reform that there is cannot be implemented at the practical level. So please, the government, if this is possible, I wanted to give the floor to sum up this round of our discussion to you, because Ilya, in such a eloquent and expressive way, told us what we have to do with the decrease in social payments. I think that many people support Ilya, but let's be more tolerant, because we want to see you as participants in these complicated discussions. So please come here, but we do want very much to hear what we have to do. Is there an understanding about the social burden on the budget? Yes, absolutely, there is an understanding, and I'll tell you that this money sometimes that the state gets for state funds through laws about social insurance are more expensive than.
It's not that, they are more expensive for the employers and the employees than just paying taxes to the budget. So the use of these funds should be more responsible, and I believe that is what Ilya was talking about. I agree almost with everything. This should be done. We need to reduce non-rational use of this money and also reduce the burden on salaries fund, because from 150 to 200 billion hryvnias from the salary fund are paid in envelopes, who will be the subject of legislative initiative. The parliament, the ministry, I believe that everyone's in the same boat. The boat, if it sinks, everyone will sink. We don't have much time left. We have this year. So during this year, you're planning to do that. And I would like to confirm what Ilya was talking about, that the increase of SSC by 2% puts into shadow 0.8%, and to go back requires 3 or 4 years. There should be the trust. And now one more thing. You were talking about labor migration, that is related to the burden on salary fund. I believe that the labor migration is not because of that. It's because we don't have jobs enough, high-quality jobs where good salaries are paid. And sociological surveys show that 86% of those who work abroad said if they had the opportunity to earn salary here and every month to save the equivalent of $100 for the family, they wouldn't go anywhere. You need to remember that as well. And I do not understand when the employer starts calculating the salary as the salary fund, the personal income tax. They pay the salary, they accrue, and then they just execute the fiscal function delegated to them by the state, and they transfer these taxes from you, from every person who gets salaried into the budget. It's not correct to calculate what the workers are paying. The microphone.
Розвитку нашої економіки. Ну це така єдина, мабуть, невеличка проблема, але її
This is the problem which is to be taken into account when the draft laws are developed. And we are looking forward to see these laws in 2015. Remarks by Yulia. Okay, let's define. Our next issue is administering VAT and tax compromise. We can continue discussing this block on innovations and leave 10 minutes for questions. Or maybe, well, do we continue to discuss tax innovations, or do we move to the second block? Because the issues which you mentioned, they're also important. We will probably move them to some other time, and now let's continue on what we started. I just want to say that besides the trust that will grow only with the stabilization of the legislation, if it gets improved for business, if it doesn't have any risks for the business, then the level of trust will be growing and more entrepreneurs will go out of the shadow. And then the reform which I believe is needed is implemented in a bad time, because many companies now, large companies, they switch to shortened working week, and if they do not dismiss their workers, they do not pay all the salaries to them. And in this situation, probably no reform will help. And it is important to suggest something for this business, maybe create some other conditions so that the business does not just come out of the shadow, but so that it can pay normal salaries, reducing their costs for paying salaries, because even white business cannot cope with such a burden. Mykhaylo Sokolov. I don't want to take a lot of your time, but briefly on our discussion. The topic is interesting, the compromise between the stimulating the business and filling in not just the pension fund, I would say the social insurance. As to the pension fund, I would say the following. This is not just the pension fund, but the pensioners who are behind that. We have the compromise between the business and people who receive these payments. And I believe that we did not have a discussion on that topic today. We had a discussion on how to stimulate the business. Only one part of that was discussed. What I would like to say. I would like to say that both the Ministry of Social Policy and the Pension Fund, we examined the issue of stimulating the business, taking it out of the shadow compromise. We have certain experience, and we examined the global experience, and we have some experts on the issues of insurance, but we shouldn't be mixing up the things like insurance and tax and taxation. I would like to give an example of Ukraine when in 2004 the personal income rate was reduced. We moved to the rate of 13%, and the salaries were sort of taken out of the shadow. The experience of Ukraine, of other countries, I mentioned that already, but let us not talk about Georgian experience, because in the system of social insurance, Georgian experience is negative, and that's recognized by all the experts. To understand it better, when last year the Vice Prime Minister of Georgia was asked about what is their level of shadow salaries, officially they said 60%. That's the indicator which we have anyway. We shouldn't be trying to get more of that. We are ready to have a discussion. We are ready to share all the knowledge, and we need to look at the expenditures. We agree with that. In Ukraine, probably the demographic situation is very complicated. I could also give you many more figures, but most probably we will discuss it some other time.
And your remark about the fact that the discussion has not gone along the lines that you would like. Yes, I accept it, but there's my remark, and we will try to make this better next time. So, but I think that we should not boil the search for compromise down to relations between business and society. Business, I think, is already non-paternal. This is a passionate part of the society, and most of the society are still paternalists, and I think that the social function of the state is to direct this non-passionate part of the society to be within the limits of the expenditures that will allow them to gradually switch from paternalist consciousness to passionate consciousness. Sorry for being so winded worst, but I think that the society that can find a common language at the business, then the leading role should be played by the state, which can help the society to live along the new paradigm. I'm very glad that you remember 2004 and the lowering of the income tax to 13%, because this is a huge example of a half reform. This was a colossal step, and a lot was legalized, I agree. But on the other hand, the idea that the income tax lives separately from the single social payment led to the fact that a lot remained in the shadow, because an employer, when they decide whether they should live in shadow or not, they think about 1,000 hryvnia that they pay to an employee in an envelope, because otherwise, instead of a 2,000, the employee will get 1,600 or 1,700. And if an entrepreneur proceeds from the fact that he may legalize, but their competitor won't legalize, they have to take into account everything: income tax and salary tax and the military tax. And another corroboration to this is that the rate of income tax now is not 13% but 20%, and we are being told that we should probably raise it to 25%. We should solve all this comprehensively. We also have a Ukrainian experience of 19 96, we had then some taxation of salary tax up to 67%. And when we lowered it by lowered it twofold, we still survived. The resource in the shadow economy is colossal. We should just dare to do this. And let's dedicate the last 10 or 15 minutes to the shadow economy. This is our magic administering of the VAT and the magic taxation compromise that started on the 17th of January, and the question to the, of course, social bloc of the government: do you think that you will be able to get the money that budget will get as a result of active participation of the business in admitting the guilt for incorrect payment of taxes for some period?
It's difficult to say what the budget will get, but undoubtedly, if the business agrees to that step, and that means that there will be legalization of business, legalization of taxes and payment of taxes, then, well, the budget does lack money for social programs. And that is what the government is criticized. You don't have any calculations from the state fiscal service. Do you have any communication? We do have it. But we understand when we get this money, then we will distribute that money. But now, to make any forecast and would be too early. The colleagues tell me, well, those issues that you're touching, they are too deep, and we will not be able to discuss it within 10 or 20 minutes. Let us organize a special roundtable to discuss these issues. Okay, in a week, we will meet to discuss this issue, but now, the beginning of that discussion, Ilya, 3-4 minutes, declaring VAT, tax compromise, and we will wider discuss it at the next roundtable, and then we'll move to 10 minutes questions from the audience. 4 minutes, very briefly, about VAT. The first thing is electronic administering of VAT, registration of tax bills of lading. And that proposal was great, but the problem was with implementation. Some sanctions are to be cancelled. Now the mechanism is that when you register during 15 days, if you take it longer than 15 days, then the sanction is not imposed. You had to increase this period till 30 days. I understand that situation, but this will be very good. Many people were against electronic reporting, but I don't see a single accountant who would say that electronic reporting is bad. After electronic bill of lading is used, then the original documents could be transferred like that. Can you imagine how the post mailing office is working? But electronically will do that, minus the mechanism of VAT accounts is not perfect. Despite the fact that certain steps are suggested, they continue to negatively influence business, taking into account the cost of credit resources in Ukraine to distract the turnover capital from this companies will worsen the situation of the companies. And Mykhaylo Sokolov and developed the proposals on what could be improved in the system. What I would like to be there is the possibility for small and medium-sized business to apply cash method for VAT. Then the money will not be distracted, and that will positively affect them, because they will not have to calculate how much they have to pay,
Норм можу сказати.
how they have to pay. And Mykhaylo Sokolov will talk about other norms.
За тиждень. І ми просто зустрінемось за тиждень одну маленьку.
One small.
Really, I didn't want to tell about all the suggestions and proposals that I put forward. We do have to have enough time to cover all this, but I want to mention one example that corroborates Ilya's message that the system is not perfect. The matter is that we are depositing the money to a special account. This is the idea of money provision. When the tax inspection saw that in this way a great amount of money is being frozen and the economy may fall, you know, the tax, they invented this draft. But we have agricultural producers who are on a special regime. This is the only benefit that works, and they do not pay money into the budget, the VAT, but they still have to form the monetary provision for this because they have to form overdraft, and this is an oxymoron, like a hot ice. Why I have to provide for the obligations that I do not have? But still, I hope that Andriy and Nina hear you. I only want to add that the system of monetary provision will work from the 1st of July of 2015, but the issue is that even without monetary provision, it does raise a lot of questions. I don't even mention that everyone had to restructure in a very short terms and to buy software and all this kind of stuff, but the tax papers are all with the mistakes, and the system does allow them with mistakes. There's an issue of corrections, and every one of us has our own understanding and vision. What will go through the formula? What will be there in the register? Where will be the gaps? How we will account for them? We are afraid that the system does not take into account all the cases, and especially transitionary clauses, when we will have to take into account late tax reports. And there's a lot of technical issues, and we still do not understand how the software of the tax administration works and how the formula is being calculated, and there are no answers. And some conclusions might be drawn within several months, and if we convene another roundtable, we should probably convene it as a result of February or some longer period, so that we can talk about errors without monetary provision, because monetary provision is still the involvement of money. Even now we undergo through difficulties, but with monetary provision the business will be hard-pressed to survive. A brief remark. I think that if the next roundtable will happen in the end of February, not everyone will survive. About what was said here, Mykhaylo said that there are contradictions between business and pensioners, as if businessmen do not want to upkeep pensioners. This is a great mistake. We do not want to pay to the people who administer this money. We very much sympathize with the pensioners because they are our parents. We are for the merger of all the social funds, and so that there is a single joint register, so that a person, for instance, is on pension and he is a veteran of some things, and he gets all the benefits, like he was managing a department in the pension fund, and now he's become a receiver of all the benefits. We are not against pensioners. We are against squandering money. Again, Andriy said that you should not allow the revenue for the budget to become lower, but I don't think it is something scary. If we lower the taxes and revenue falls, this is a very good stimulus for the decrease in budgetary expenditures. Like, for instance, at the moment we have 950 billion hryvnia of revenue, then why the officials should cut the expenditure? We have 9 minutes left. Who will be asking questions? And please tell us whom you want to ask.
Ridko Vyacheslav, the entrepreneur from Donetsk region. I temporarily live here. I have several questions. First, entrepreneurs who have competitors, producers in garages, and they will not survive because the tax on land, the water, the tariffs, and so on. And two more questions. Do you know, as the MPs, about the draft law of Donetsk professor Kendyuk, who suggests some interesting models which could be used? And second question, are you considering the issue of entrepreneurs from ATO zone? How should they behave, because they fall under double taxation? If people have their assets there, they have to get registered there and get registered here and pay double taxes. I can answer, but do you want MPs to answer? Kendyukov is the tax on turnover. Based on the association agreement, the requirements which are there, we cannot refuse from VAT, and we cannot introduce the turnover tax. And also with these systems, the big producers, big networks, they invest a lot, but the small producer who needs to contact via distributors company becomes non-competitive. We're killing them. I have several questions. Ukrainian Crisis Media Center, but the journalist requested me to ask this question, those who are listening and watching online. The colleagues would like to know when the audit of pension fund will be made public. That's first question. And the second is on such a norm in the law. The law says that the state compensates the expenditures for paying salaries to those who are mobilized to the war. But I know that there are no such compensations, and the Ministry of Finance says that that is the Ministry of Social Labor, which is to do that. But we have, what's the problem with these compensations? I will answer the second question. Now, we have finalized such a procedure. In a week or two, it will be made public. Why we didn't have it before? Because There was no financing from the state budget planned. Now there are more than 1,700,000,000 hryvnias planned in the budget, and that procedure will start operating. Now, talking about the audit of pension fund, every year in the beginning of April, the pension fund publishes a detailed report on executing their budget. As to audit of the pension fund, the control over the expenditures of pension fund are made by the accounting chamber and control and revision department. All the money is under control. I haven't been working in pension fund long, but in the pension fund, the system is the following. Practically, all the expenditures are charged, are covered, and they are charged from every pension. And there was a question asked on whether, well, about use of money for target audiences. We are talking about the money which we receive from insurance contributions. All the expenditures which go as social payments, payments to children, veterans, and so on, that's all from the state budget. The pay-as-you-go system is used only for insurance pensions. If the pensions are paid only from insurance money.
We have 1 minute left. Valery Sokolovsky, Lookout to Continent. About the tax on imported goods. As you know, from the 1st of January, the law works about the additional excise on the imported goods. So how this will influence the capacity of international transporters to buy. I don't know such a tax, at least the money that would go to the pension fund. You know, when they voted for this at the parliament, it was about further consultations with European partners, so this doesn't work now. But another question I have to Mykhaylo, we talk a lot about Georgia, and when they were liquidating their pension fund, they found that some 30% of the register were about dead people. We don't have such a problem. A lot of pensioners a lot of pensions is being paid through post offices, and they deliver to people individually. Another part is being paid through banks, and banks annually control the presence of whether the pensioners are alive or not. So this is controlled by the banks, and also they are limited by the fact that the term of validity of cards is just 1 year. And the most efficient in this case is another step, that they pay the money to help for the funeral, and 90% of dead pensioners are being detected through this. We do not have dead souls, but dead cities in the pension fund. I have a brief question about practice. The producers were not paying actual expenditure for payment and delivery of pensions to those who were receiving special pensions. Now we have a single tax, which in essence actually corresponds to the fixed agricultural tax. Now we have letters from new calculations, and the agrarian producers have to pay more. In essence, this is a formal mistake, because in the tax code you don't have a brief remark that used to be there previously. So, do you plan to make an amendment here so that to relieve our agricultural producers from paying additional money? If this is the question to me, then I'll tell you that the question of this collision is the issue of hasty changes that were done without consulting the pension fund. As for the essence of the question, for the gist of the question, from 2012, we are talking about the cancellation of this procedure, and since 2012 this draft law was in the parliament. They did not manage to consider it up to date, and we are now looking at this issue to solve it in a targeted way. Again, they are talking past the mic, and we cannot provide you with a translation. And there's a lot being said, but unfortunately, it's about different problems for different enterprises. Okay, excuse us, but within several minutes we'll have another briefing, and we'll have to talk in the lobby. Regrettably, the timing is very strict.